Story 1. OBGYN here. Many men ask me for an extra stitch or to tighten things up after delivery. I used to ignore them, but now I just deadpan. How small do you need it, sir? Recently, a young dad who was very nervous about delivery asked me if I do this often, meaning deliver babies. His girlfriend exasperatedly exclaimed, "This is her job." During my residency, I had a patient who barely made it to the hospital before having her baby after her water broke in her husband's brand new sports car. He couldn't stop talking about the interior of his car, which I get, but maybe wait at least an hour or two after your wife has an unmediated childbirth. Also, during my OB rotation in med school, we had a super morbidly obese pregnant woman with a BMI in the 70s. During her first prenatal visit, the resident asked her about her pregnancy history, past difficulty with fertility and conception, problems with the pregnancy so far, etc. The husband then chimed in about the conception. Turns out they had no trouble conceiving. He then went into detail about how the conception went, which blew my inexperienced mind. Basically, the wife's mother and sister had to help by holding her thighs out of the way so he could get it in to do the job. I still don't have words. I try to imagine the scene in my head, but my brain just started melting. Those ladies basically dug a tunnel to the center of the earth so that nature could take its course. Story 2. This is a story from my internship. I was checking on a woman who wasn't progressing in labor, and I had a feeling that something wasn't right. Sure enough, the baby was breached, meaning it was coming out feet first instead of head first. The woman was very tiny, and the baby was large, so it was clear that she would need a C-section. The woman was a recent immigrant from a small third-world country. She didn't have her partner with her, and she didn't speak any English. Unfortunately, no one on the unit spoke her language either. I tried my best to explain what was happening and what we were recommending using hand gestures and facial expressions, but I could tell that she was still confused. We sent someone down to housekeeping and the cafeteria to see if we could find a staff member who could translate. Luckily, we found someone who was able to help. It turned out that the woman understood that the baby was breached, but she thought that we were choosing the baby's life over hers. Her relief and joy when she finally understood what the plan actually was something I'll never forget. The staff member from housekeeping was wonderful, and she stayed to support the woman until she went into the operating room. Story 3. Not a mind-blowing thing that was said, but still kind of funny. When I was in medical school, I did my obstetrics rotation in the high-risk area. Medical students were generally scared of this area, so I was the only student with an awesome attending physician and got to do a lot. We called the attending physician on this service a random thought generator. If he thought of something, he would say or act on it. One day, a patient showed up on our service in active labor. She had a very uneventful pregnancy, and we couldn't figure out why she was on our service, but hey, we'll take a normal patient. She arrived with perfect makeup and perfect hair. She also had the perfect epidural and was in no pain or distress. The attending looked at me and said that I'd be doing this delivery. Okay, I thought, no problem. Then he looked at the father and said, "No, you'll deliver this one." The father got wide-eyed and the mother started laughing. "He's an air traffic controller. I've never seen him panic before." The nurse led him to the sink, gave him a scrub brush, and instructed him to start washing his hands. We turned back to the mom and said, "Okay, push. 1, 2, 3, 10, relax." We looked at the dad and saw that he was still washing the same finger he started with. "Okay, that's good enough," we said. "A delivery is by no means sterile. Put these on." Our attending physician didn't put women in stirrups, but delivered straight onto the bed. He had the dad sit on the bed with him on one side and me on the other, and the dad delivered his own healthy child. The dad did great. Afterwards, I was sitting with him filling out paperwork when he asked if mom was going to be breastfed. I told him I'd go ask. I walked into the room and then quickly excused myself. I went back to him and said that it was a definite yes. Story 4. My OB-GYN told me a story about a baby he delivered. It was the couple's 6th child, and they were very observant Orthodox Jews. So when the woman called the doctor at 11 p.m. on Shabbat to say that she was in labor, her husband couldn't drive them to the hospital himself. The doctor understood, but he tried to explain how urgent the situation was as the delivery was going to be very fast. The doctor rushed to the hospital and waited. He waited for 30 minutes, an hour. He was pacing up and down the drop-off area. Finally, 90 minutes later, a taxi screeched into the parking lot at 2 a.m. The doctor opened the car door to see the baby's head crowning, the woman yelling, and the driver yelling. The husband flung open his door and sprinted off into the parking lot, yelling. He ran a full loop while his baby was being born and then ran back to the hospital as the nurses were wrapping up the baby and getting the mother and baby into a wheelchair. Doctor, what happened? Where did you go? Dad, I just didn't know what to do. The poor guy was so hopped up on adrenaline that he just took off. Story 5. OBGYN here. Here's a story from my residency. The boyfriend of a woman in labor got into a fight in the labor and delivery ward because the woman found out that he was also the father of the baby of the woman in the next room. He had been telling her that he was going outside to smoke, but he was really going to see the other woman. When the boyfriend's girlfriend confronted him, he said, "I hope my son tears you up on the way out." Later, in the delivery room of the other woman, the boyfriend dared to tap me on the elbow and said in front of her, "Sew it up tightly for me, Doc. My boy has damaged lady bits from day one. You know what I mean?" I got in trouble for saying, "You're freaking gross. Don't touch or talk to me." Before that, in medical school, during my OB rotation, a husband said, "Holy cow," as his wife's baby was crowned. He then fainted and hit his head on the bedside table on his way down. He had to be admitted to the same hospital as his wife, but she was discharged before he was. That boyfriend is a walking dumpster fire of red flags. And that husband, well, his fainting act really stole the spotlight. Story 6. My dad was an OB-GYN for more than 30 years. Now he's retired. He told me a story about a very religious couple who came in because they were having trouble getting pregnant. He examined the woman alone and discovered that she was actually interested, meaning she had male gonads and no uterus but normal outer lady parts. The woman was devastated to learn this at her age. She was afraid that her husband would be violent, believing that she had been gay by sleeping with him. My dad gave her the option to call the police or ask for help. He and the nurses gave her phone numbers for counseling and offered to be discreet when talking to her husband. She declined everything and asked that they tell him together. The man was very upset and they eventually left the office, both in tears. My dad never saw her again and wondered what happened. Several people have asked me how she didn't realize something was wrong when she missed her period for multiple years. I asked my dad the same question. He said that she did experience mild and intermittent time of the month-like symptoms such as cramps, but they were very far apart and, in hindsight, completely unrelated to the actual experience. She was from a rural community and never sought medical attention, like due to money, fear, and the fact that she was otherwise completely healthy. I also remember him saying that the marriage was arranged, and I'm sure her family was apprehensive about fertility issues. Story 7. As a medical student, I have an interesting story from my OB-GYN placement. A married woman visited the clinic, concerned about her fertility as she had been experiencing difficulties in conceiving. It turned out that they had a bit of a misunderstanding about how things worked. Instead of the proper approach, her husband had been trying something quite unconventional. He thought it involved putting his ding-dong in her belly button, believing it was what his friends did. The twist to this story was that both of them had grown up in very religious households with limited exposure to proper education. I couldn't help but feel sympathy for their situation. Damn, that belly button might be so deep that even a Vienna sausage would get lost inside. Hey, if you want to hear more epic fail stories that'll make you laugh and cringe all at the same time, then hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Story 8. I don't have a medical background, but I work at a labor and delivery hospital. I came across a note in our patient records from a previous office visit which read, "Chief complaint, husband concerned about wife's weight gain during pregnancy." Interestingly, she was actually under the weight she needed to be at the time. When my wife was giving birth to our third child through a VBAC, I jokingly asked the doctor, "Can I be the one who cuts the umbilical cord in half?" He looked at me with a distant expression and said, "Yeah, I guess." After dealing with several complications and spending several hours in labor, our beautiful daughter was born. The doctor then said, "All right, Daddy, stand up and cut this cord if you're ready." Well, I didn't end up doing it. Story 9. My dad is a doctor, and he has a friend who's an OB-GYN. One day, this friend shared a story with my dad about a couple who had been struggling to conceive. They'd been trying for over a year, but the wife hadn't become pregnant. It turned out that their upbringing had been quite conservative, and the husband had some unusual notions about intimacy. He needed to follow the usual playbook and was essentially doing things his own way, which was far from effective. My dad's friend had to have the birds and the bees talk with both of them and explain what they needed to do and how to do it. It was an incredibly awkward conversation, to say the least. I couldn't help but wonder, hadn't they ever watched an informative video or had the talk with their parents? Had they never come across relevant information? It was quite a perplexing story. I'm still left curious about whether they ever managed to figure things out and eventually have children. Story 10. I'm a nurse and once assisted in delivering a young girl's baby while I was still in school. She was very young, and the father, who appeared much older, was in the room too. When the baby arrived, everyone else was filled with excitement and emotion, but the father's reaction was just a nonchalant, He shrugged it off as if it were no big deal. My mother was also an OBGYN, and in one instance, she performed a manual examination on a woman. The husband, with an angry tone, inquired if there was any alternative way for the exam to be conducted without her using her fingers, as he was uncomfortable with her examining his wife in that manner. Story 11. My mom was a general practitioner. One day, a young woman came in with a positive pregnancy test, but she insisted that she couldn't be pregnant. My mom confirmed the pregnancy, but the woman still refused to believe it. She explained to my mom that she couldn't get pregnant because her boyfriend had told her that if she lay completely still, then she wasn't quote-unquote active and couldn't get pregnant. For me, it was like she told my mom, "But doctor, I'm intimately passive." Story 12. I worked in a diagnostic center, and one day an OB-GYN referred a patient for an ultrasound to find out why she was having trouble getting pregnant. The technician inserted the probe, but the woman flinched in pain. The technician asked if it hurt during intimate times, and the woman explained that her husband didn't insert it there, but rather in her belly button. The technician was so flustered that she had to call the doctor to explain why the patient was having trouble getting pregnant. This happened twice at the clinic. Twice. My friend reacted to this story by saying, "At that point, we should just let nature take its course and maybe not educate people on the workings of baby making to avoid producing more belly button probers." And I was convinced. I know it sounds harsh to deprive people of the pleasures of the flesh, but dang, man, I fear for their children. Story 13. ER nurse here. One day, a young woman came in with abdominal pain. She had 2 kids and was pregnant again. She said she wasn't happy to be pregnant again, but she didn't want to break up with her boyfriend. I thought the boyfriend might have been mistreating her or preventing her from using birth control, so I closed the door and asked her some questions. It turned out that she didn't know that doing the deed could cause pregnancy. Her baby-making education consisted of get a boyfriend, get married, and the babies arrive with no other details. She thought that once you had a boyfriend, babies were automatic and that physical intimacy was just a fun thing to do. We had a very long talk. Also, last month, a dad asked one of our OBs for an extra stitch during his wife's repair after delivery. The OB's immediate response was, "Exactly how small do you need it to be, sir?" She's a frickin' legend in our unit now. I'm going to spread this story so it can become the standard response to this all-too-common statement. Story 14. One dad asked for a C-section so her lady parts wouldn't be ruined, or another dad asking for her to be stitched up extra tight after giving birth. Another dad couldn't seem to keep his clothes on during their entire stay. The nurses had to talk to him several times about keeping his clothes on. He just kept taking off his clothes and walking around. He'd even go out to the coffee station in the hall wearing only his underwear, and he'd be bare in the hospital room. We had to ask him to wear pants and a shirt when he was in the hallway, and at least pants in the hospital room. And no, he wasn't trying to get into bed with her. Story 15. I used to work in a pharmacy, and we noticed a teenage girl coming in to pick up her birth control prescription 2 weeks early every month. This was odd because birth control pills are packaged to make it easy to track your daily dose, and they're not something that people typically mishandle, like Xanax, for example. After a few months, the pharmacist spoke to the girl and learned that she and her boyfriend were sharing her pills. Maybe they were onto some experiment to double its effectiveness? Unfortunately, the only thing they ended up with was a double dose of raging hormones. Story 16. I'm a physician assistant working in inpatient obstetrics and gynecology. I've seen some interesting things in my job, like the time a father brought his PS4 to the delivery room so he could play Spider-Man while his wife was being induced. And another time, a guy was caught cheating on his wife when she was postpartum, and he went to use his phone to take pictures of the baby. Oops. Story 17. I work in internal medicine, and a patient's partner not wanting us to reveal an HIV diagnosis to the patient was definitely a low point for me. Unfortunately, where I work, that's probably not even that surprising. Back in my emergency room days, a young teenager came in with pregnancy-like symptoms. Of course, her pregnancy test was positive, and she seemed completely shocked. I asked her if she was intimately active. Yes, she said. Did you use protection? No. Birth control pills? No. Even still, she seemed surprised that she was pregnant. Well, it was no surprise to me, really. I knew someone just like her. She didn't use birth control pills, rubber, or anything else. Her methods were counting ovulation days and her belief that Asian men are sterile. We're all Asian, by the way. She was just really crazy. We went to the same high school and received the same reproductive health education. She graduated with a biology medical-related degree, so I expected her to know better. But nope, she chose to do what she felt was right. Story 18. I'll definitely never forget the story I gave the nurse who was taking care of my wife and me after our second child was born. We had been in labor all day, and she had only been on liquids, so she hadn't had anything to eat in like 12 hours. We were relaxing, relatively speaking, with the nurse while holding the baby when I turned to ask her a question. She paused, turned away, turned back to me and said, "Not anytime soon." Disappointed, I tried to push for more specifics. "I'm talking about snacks," I said. "When can my wife have snacks?" That was a pretty vague answer for someone who hadn't eaten in 12 hours. Turns out she thought I was asking when my wife could have checks, but the other word that sounds like that and not the snack. After a good laugh, the correct answer was a couple of hours. I can't imagine what was going through her head before the clarification. Story 19. My mom is an OB/GYN and she once called a patient into her office to tell her that she was positive. The patient said, "I knew it." My mom asked her how and why she knew, and the patient explained that her husband had been positive for years. The couple had decided to never talk about it, and they had been doing it without protection for 5 years. This is the price of shirking responsibility and looking the other way. In other words, it's the idiot tax. At least the husband was consistent. He was always irresponsible and really positive about it. Story 20. I'm not an OB/GYN, but I am a flight medic, and I've had the unique experience of delivering 3 babies. Each of those moments is etched in my memory. The second baby I helped deliver arrived about 5 weeks early, and it happened in the middle of nowhere, miles from civilization. The family had gone camping in the desert, and that's when the mom went into labor. By the time we reached them, there was no turning back, and the baby was ready to make an appearance. The mom was in a somewhat squatting position with her forearms resting on the middle row of seats in a van, and her rear end was sticking out the door. She was wearing a loose dress. Just as she was pushing the baby's head out, the dad had a moment of concern, saying, Wait, we might get stains on the floor." The mom shot him the most intense death glare and replied, "I don't care about your mom's van." That incident ended up becoming a unit motto, a reminder of that incredible and humorous moment. Story 21. I'm not an OB/GYN, but I had an interesting experience with mine. You see, my parents pulled me out of those birds and the bees classes, promising to educate me themselves, but it never happened. Instead, I found myself in counseling sessions. During one of those sessions, my OB/GYN told me about quote-unquote the sailor's cup of tea. She mentioned that it was a real thing, but assured me it wouldn't lead to pregnancy. She recounted at least 8 instances in her life, she was in her late 40s to early 50s, where couples were struggling with fertility issues, and it turned out to be because the husband had been aiming at the wrong target. What made it even more embarrassing was that these were quite traditional couples, and they were shocked they might be engaging in something considered unconventional. So you can only imagine the kind of conversations that woman had over the years. Story 22. I'm not a physician, but I work in obstetrics. One day, we had a code OB announced over the hospital's intercom system. This means that a woman is giving birth elsewhere in the hospital and needs immediate attention. In this particular case, the woman's husband was worried about getting a parking ticket, so he decided to park in the parking garage and walk her to the hospital entrance even though she was in labor. As you can imagine, they didn't quite make it and the baby ended up being born in the car. To respect their religious beliefs and prevent the woman from being exposed to a male doctor, they kept her pants on throughout the entire process. The baby, placenta, and all were snugly tucked inside this woman's pants. It was quite a shocking situation. Fortunately, both the baby and the mother ended up okay in the end. That guy's so law-abiding that he'd rather have his wife give birth in the car than risk getting a parking ticket. Talk about priorities, man. Hey, if you made it to the end of this video, then you're really into these crazy daddy tales. So go watch Dads, When Did You Learn That Your Kid Wasn't Yours? Story 4 is quite a treat. I'll see you there.